So we are now just about 2 weeks away from the NFL draft, and unlike the past couple of years, there really isn't a clear number one overall pick. Aiden Hutchinson has been at the top of plenty of Ryan Wilson's mock drafts. Pete Prisco had him there 2 weeks ago. A guy like Evan Neal could easily hear his name called, but the number one overall prospect, according to CBS Sports, well, that belongs to Notre Dame safety Kyle Hamilton. Here are the top five. When it comes to CBS Sports, by the way, you can see the full list on cbssports.com. Coming in at number one as the overall prospect, as I mentioned, Kyle Hamilton, followed by Aiden Hutchinson, Sauce Gardner, Evan Neal, and then Kayvon Thibodeaux. Let's welcome in Pete Prisco, Brady Quinn. I'm Amanda Guerra. We have given Brady and Pete homework. We'll see how well they follow it at giving us their top five prospects heading into the draft. Your number one overall prospect, Brady Quinn, we'll start with you.
To me, it's Aiden Hutchinson out of Michigan, the defensive end who just had an outstanding year. And I know a lot of people feel like he may have burst onto the scene, but I think this was more building. But when you look at the tape and you look at really the most bulletproof prospect in this draft class, Aiden Hutchinson is that. He comes into a league with a variety of moves, counters, and ways of getting to the opposing quarterback. You see all-out effort, even the backside of plays, and obviously a high football IQ. And he was doing more things within the Michigan defense this past year that should translate to the NFL level. So, a lot of people will question potentially his ceiling or his upside. The reality is, from day one, you're getting the type of guy that's going to come in, work his tail off, be everything your organization is hoping he will be, and be a very productive player for a long time.
Yeah, he's not my number one player. My number one player is Evan Neal. And the reason I put Evan Neal number one is I just think he's the cleanest player in this draft. I think he's a plug and play, 10 to 12 year starter. Will go to about 5 or 6 Pro Bowls. And Brady, look, I like Aiden Hutchinson. I think he's a really good player. He plays hard. But my concern with Aiden Hutchinson is this. What is his ceiling? Is he a 10, 11 sack guy? Is he Grant Wistrom or Chris Long, or is he TJ Watt, or is he somewhere in between? And I think that's the question scouts and personnel people are asking. He's got great moves. You mentioned it. His hands are outstanding. He's explosive. But what is his ceiling when he's working against NFL top-tier tackles? And that's my concern with him. So I put Evan Neal number one. I think he's clean. I think he will be in there and be a quality long-term starter who's going to a lot of Pro Bowls at left tackle.
So, Pete, using your exact same rationale that you used for Evan Neal, do you not envision Aiden Hutchinson being a 10, 12-year starter for whatever team drafts him?
Well, I think he's going to be a starter, and I think he's going to be a really good player. That's not my argument with him. Is he going to be the 15, 16 sack guy every year?
Well,
or is he going to be more like a 10 or 11 sack guy?
I'll put it this way. If history tends to repeat itself, there's a good chance Aiden Hutchinson could replicate that at the NFL level. Now, there's some other DNs in this draft class that you might have ranked higher who haven't even had double-digit sacks or haven't even had the amount that Aiden Hutchinson have had. So that's going to be an interesting debate here in a moment.
I will say Pete has Aiden Hutchinson in his top five. He is not at number two. Let's go to number two for you because this is where we find Pete Prisco's number one in Evan Neal.
Yeah, look, I'm in agreement with Pete Prisco about Evan Neal. As far as a draft prospect at a tackle position, he's versatile. He's a physical freak when you put on the tape. He obviously has a lot of things you love about him. So I just didn't have him ranked highly as Aiden Hutchinson, in part because I think Aiden Hutchinson just had a better year on tape. And people may talk about ceilings. Like, a lot of that's going to be dependent upon where he goes, what sort of organization and team he's with, who's he playing across from. For Evan Neal, he could have a phenomenal rookie season, and no one really knows because they're kind of going to eat up at that tackle spot. So I'm with Pete as far as what Evan Neal will be and is probably going to be. But to me, Aiden Hutchinson stood out more this year.
I mean, they're both really good players, and they're both going to be really good NFL players. I don't think there's any dispute about that. And I'm not going to sit here and say Aiden Hutchinson's not going to be a good player, but Evan Neal is going to be one of the best left tackles in the league, and he's going to be a star. The question becomes, in 5 years, will we be sitting here saying Aiden Hutchinson's one of the 5 best pass rushers in the league? Is he a Bosa? Is he Nick Bosa? Is he Joey Bosa? I don't think he is. And so for that reason, that's why I put Evan Neal in that spot. And I think if Jacksonville's smart, if they do not get a long-term deal worked out with Cam Robinson, you draft Evan Neal, you do something with Cam Robinson, maybe trade him or take the tag off him and play Evan Neal at left tackle.
Well, I can agree with that. I mean, one, it's a bigger need for them. If you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they've spent a lot of draft capital on the edge in recent draft classes. You just drafted Trevor Lawrence last year. They had a hard time getting protection. why not draft a tackle to help protect him, whether it's Evan Neal or another tackle prospect that you're looking at that's high in the first round?
All right, Pete, so give us your number 2 overall prospect, because it's a guy Brady doesn't even have in his top 5.
Yeah, it's Kayvon Thibodeaux. And look, when I watched Kayvon Thibodeaux, I went into that with an open mind thinking, okay, I've heard all the stories about him taking off plays and not being a great guy and, one of those guys that doesn't love football. But the tape tells you otherwise. There aren't a lot of plays where he takes time off. There's a lot of plays where he's influencing the quarterback and not getting sacks. And I go back to what I said, I think last week with you, Amanda, or with Chris. I said, I always use the Russell Westbrook theory on evaluating players. And by that I mean this. When Russell Westbrook came out of UCLA, he averaged, I think, 12 points a game. That was the best he ever averaged. But you know what? His skill set translated to the NBA game. And Kayvon Thibodeaux's skill set translates to the NFL game. He will be a star pass rusher on the next level. I went in with an open mind thinking I wouldn't like him, and I loved him. I think he's going to be the best pass rusher in this draft class.
He definitely has the ability to be that. It's just whether or not he wants to turn that switch on. I think the hardest thing for me was not having him play against some of the top talent, especially his tackle. You got to see Aiden Hutchinson play against Ohio State. I wish we got to see Kayvon Thibodeaux do that. He wasn't healthy for that game, so we didn't get to see what that looked like. Watching Aiden Hutchinson go up against the Iowa offensive line in the Big Ten championship game, no matter what they tried to do, they could not stop him. So you have those examples of what Hutchinson was able to do. You didn't have that quite as much with Kayvon Thibodeaux. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to be able to go in the league and be an impactful player, but I don't have him as my top 5 because I didn't see quite as much for the tape as Pete did. Now, maybe he's got rose-colored glasses on, or it's old age, and he's having a hard time seeing it. Now, he is, to me, number 6, number 7 as far as the prospect, but I didn't have him ranked quite high as Pete did because Pete's betting on the future and things that he hasn't even seen yet, and that's what he's trying to bet on here. I'm betting on what I've at least seen him do at college that should translate to the NFL level, depending on where he gets drafted and where they end up going to. The situation and circumstance matters for quarterbacks more than anyone else, but it also does for players like a Kayvon Thibodeaux, like a Aiden Hutchinson, that scheme fit.
By the way, if I have rose-colored glasses on, I think your next prospect means for 100% certainty, which is not a shock, by the way, that you have blue and gold teal-colored glasses on. I mean, my God, Brady. If there's a Notre Dame guy from any class, you're going to put him in the top 5 or 10. It's ridiculous.
Hey, Pete, he is number 1 on our CBSSports.com website. You know that, right? Like, that's not even part of my decision. They have him ranked higher than I have him ranked.
Go ahead, Amanda, tell him who's number 3 on
so we're
his
talking
list,
about
Kyle
Hamilton coming in at Brady's number 3 overall prospect, safety out of Notre Dame.
It's not ridiculous. He actually, if you watch the tape, you would say he had a bigger impact than anyone else when he's out there on the field with his versatility, what he's able to do in the deep portion of the field, match up man-to-man coverage as an open field tackler, whether he blitzes, whatever you asked him to do. His tape was absolutely phenomenal. So as a prospect, yes, he's in my top 5, deservedly so. Now, Pete's going to sit there and knock the fact that he's a safety. That's stupid. I'm sorry. You can't sit there and just knock guys because of the position they play. Was the tape unbelievable? Yes, for the games he played this season, it was incredible. And that's why he deserves to be in the top 5, in my opinion, Pete.
Well, I disagree with you. Yes, position value matters. And who was the last safety? Who's the last safety that you really had to say, wow, he's impacting the game. He's a game changer. Was it Ed Reed? How long ago was that? They don't change the game, so you don't take him in the top 5A. And if he is a great safety, which I don't think he is, I think he's overrated. I'll be honest with you. I think he's a little stiff. I think his hips are a little stiff, and I don't think he runs that well. 4.7 something. That doesn't translate to a guy who plays sideline to sideline. Jalen Petrie, I'm going to say it. I've said it over and over again. From Baylor, will be a better safety in the NFL. This kid is ranked way too high by all the draft analysts, in my opinion.
First off, Jalen Petrie's going to be a nickelback, so Pete doesn't not watch enough film to know what Jalen Petrie's position really was.
Yes, he's going to be a honey badger is what he's going to be.
Okay.
He's going to be honey badger.
He'll play nickel more often than not. But I don't need to get into debate with Pete about this. I can trust me from playing the game. And I know Pete hates admitting that, but he sits as an armchair quarterback. Some of us actually played the position. And the reality is safeties do impact the game, especially a player that can move around like you talk about with Tyrann Mathieu. You know what the difference between Tyrann Mathieu and Kyle Hamilton is? Overall size and ability. Tyrann Mathieu's not going to play the deep middle of the field, not because he necessarily can't. He doesn't have the same type of range as a guy like Kyle Hamilton, but he can also play in the box, and he can also match up with tight ends on the outside. You see all of that from his tape. So the first words of what Pete says is why he doesn't have as a top 5 prospect. It's because the position that he plays. That's the reality of it. And he's discounting him because of the position. I'm not going to do that to him.
It impacts it, but it impacts it. Yes, it does impact it. But Brady, you're comparing him to Honey Badger. Honey Badger was a corner in college. You remember that, right? He has coverage ability. He can line up and cover people.
Versatility. Take the Q-tip and then get your ear loosened up.
Hamilton is stiff in coverage. Don't put the
man.
Cincinnati tape on. He got beat a couple different ways in coverage by the slot receiver against Cincinnati. He's not that good in coverage. I think he's going to be a little bit of a liability in coverage. He will be okay. He's not a top 5 player in my book.
Such a pity we don't have both of you on set today. Pete, so who do you have number 3 right now?
Well, I mean, Aiden Hutchinson's number 3 for me, and we talked about him. I mean, he's a guy that can really rush the passer. I just worry about where he's going in terms of the ceiling. And not only that, he was a one-hit wonder. And there are concerns about a one-hit wonder. I don't have those concerns because I think this kid worked his butt off. He's made himself into a heck of a player. I just worry about what he's going to be. If he's T.J. Watt, worth the number 1, number 2, number 3 overall pick. I get it. If he's Chris Long and Grant Wistrom, he's not. And so somewhere in between, I think he's one of those guys.
I think the hard part about that is it's the same thing I keep saying, and Pete's just not getting it. It's situation and circumstance. So, of course, if Aiden Hutchinson goes to the right circumstance or situation, like a Pittsburgh Steelers organization, it's much easier for him to take off. Now, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about top 5 prospect because the Steelers aren't drafting there. But, you look at Kayvon Thibodeaux, it's the same situation for him. If he ends up on a team that doesn't know how to utilize his skill set and how to utilize his talent and how to coach him up and help him develop, it's no different. I mean, we're talking about Aiden Hutchinson being a one-hit wonder. What's Kayvon Thibodeaux? I mean, was there a year where he stood out that much to you, Pete? I mean, who had the better year this year, Aiden Hutchinson or Kayvon Thibodeaux?
Yeah, 2 years ago he was very good.
He was better than Aiden Hutchinson this past year?
He was a very good player. No, Aiden Hutchinson's numbers and production was better this year. I'm not going to argue that, Brady.
Don't call a guy a one-hit wonder.
I have a number 3 on my board. This isn't as absurd as having Kyle Hamilton number 3. I have him 3.
Well, because of the position he plays.
Okay, so let's go to the number 4 overall prospect because somehow, some way, you guys actually agree on this. Both of you going with Sauce Gardner.
Yeah, well, I'll let Pete talk because it's his world we're all just living in it. So go ahead, Pete.
Welcome to my world, Brady. You got to pay me to get into that world, by the way. Come on, pay up. No, look, we agree because Sauce Gardner's the cleanest. He's the best corner in this draft. I do like Stingley from LSU a lot. They're close for me. But Gardner played at a high level. He's a big corner, a long corner, played great man coverage. I think you can play him in any style of defense. It's another one of those value picks. You remember, Brady, it's the quarterback, the guy who knocks the quarterback down, the guy who knocks the quarterback's passes down, and the left tackle who keeps the quarterback clean. Those are your value picks, and wide receiver is in that conversation now, not safety.
Right. Okay. So moving back to the same old thing, not only top prospects, it's really the position they play as part of that. Again, I'm just going based off the tape. The reality is, Pete mentioned Derek Stingley. He was phenomenal in 2019. I think when you watch him move, you see how fluid he is. He very well could end up being the best cornerback prospect of this class, but I have recency bias. I just watched Sauce Gardner have the best season of any quarterback in this draft class. So I put him in this spot because I think his film's clean. I think he's that tall, length that you're looking for. Pete talked about the fact he can play you press man-to-man coverage or off coverage. He's got sticky fingers. He's going to be able to find his way to the football. He's not scared to go up and hit someone or blitz off the edge. He really is the entire package. You saw that on tape this year. So I think he's very deserving of being the number 4 prospect, not because of his position, but because of just his tape and what he was able to accomplish.
I want to go to the number 5 prospect for both of you because so far, between the top 4, you've hit on all 5 of CBS's top 5. These next 2 are not there. Pete, I want to start with you. You like Ike Ekwonu, who was number 10 on CBS's list of the top prospects.
Yeah, and this is a left tackle who's got a ton of athletic ability, but I think he needs work. That's why I think Evan Neal's a little bit better. I think he ducks his head when he's in pass protection, but boy, he is a violent run blocker. I mean, he's nasty. He pushes right to the envelope, and that's why I think some teams that I've talked to think he would be an all-world guard maybe if they moved him inside. I think he can play both. I think he can play left tackle. Actually, I think he can play right tackle, and I think he can play guard. He is talented. I think he's just scratching the surface, but he needs to get better in pass protection, particularly against speed guys. I think he ducks his head too much, and that's something that'll get coached out of him. He will be a heck of a player in the NFL.
He's a top 10 prospect in my opinion, but Pete touched on it. You know, this is a passing league. You're not running the football quite as much anymore. So that's why I'm a bit surprised Pete has him ranked this high, in part because he knows that. He just talked about that. And you're also then looking at a guy who could go from tackle to guard, which you'd say that's way too high, you know, to put a guard in this sort of conversation. So I don't have him there as my top 5, but again, I think he's a top 10 prospect. If you're looking for upside, people talk about all that. He's got the bones, he's got the athleticism, everything you're looking for at building a cornerstone left tackle if he ends up having the time and patience to put him out there and go through some of those growing pains.
All right, we're going to move from Pete's world to Brady's world, talking about your number 5 overall prospect. Make the case for the guy coming in at number 5 and Jordan Davis.
Yeah, it's actually Jordan Davis's world because he's so massive of a human being that I think
big
we're
guy.
all just living in his world when it's all said and done. The thing that impressed me the most, besides watching the tape, and look, I get it, Georgia's defense is extremely talented. This guy still stood out to me. And you can't teach this sort of size and power and strength and athleticism, and talk to some coaches too. As much as people wanted to give Trayvon Walker a bunch of credit and wide up front, they kept saying that big boy Jordan Davis, he just makes it a long day. He keeps you up at night preparing for him week in and week out. And to me, showing that he could lose the sort of weight he did and watching him move around the way he did at the combine at 340, 345 pounds, whatever the number ended up being, you can't teach that. And so for me, as far as a prospect, interior player like that will end up staying on the field all 3 downs, even though you'll hear people tell you he won't, he will. That guy to me is a top 5 prospect.
You know, Brady, I love this pick by you. I really do. I didn't put him there, but I could easily see putting him in that top 5 because, you know, most draft people and analysts, they have him down in the 15 to 20. I think he's much better than that, and I agree with you. He is a power player, but he is going to be a guy who can push the pocket on the inside. He spent a lot of time this offseason working with Chuck Smith, who I know very well, who really works on those guys, getting him to help rush the passer, and I think he's going to be better rushing the passer. He will be a force in the NFL for whoever picks him, and I could see him going top 10 for sure. Most people don't see that. I could see that happening. And oh, by the way, he's the second best defensive tackle on his own team last year. Jalen Carter will be a top 5 pick next year.
You good?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
again,
he actually agreed with you on one thing.
Sort of,
a little bit. Pete
I did. I like it.
Pete Prisco, Brady Quinn. Let's take a look at their top of 5 prospects for each of them. There's a little bit of argument when it comes to Kyle Hamilton or Kayvon Thibodeaux for that matter, but they both agree on Sauce Gardner coming in at number 4. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.